Mic test 1 2 3. Test 1 2. Is that loud?
1 1 1.
Test 1 2 3. No.
Testing 1 2.
Another box for us.
Mic test 1 2.
Test 1 2 1 2 3. 1 1 2 3. Test.
Test for the court reporter. Testing 1 2 3. Testing for the court reporter. Test test. Testing for the court reporter. Sound check. Testing for the court reporter. Sound check for the court reporter. 1 2 3 4. Checking for the court reporter. Sound check for the court reporter. Testing for the court reporter. Sound check for the court reporter. Test test.
Check 1 2 3. 1 2 1 2 3. One, two, three, check. 1 2 3.
Test test for the court reporter. Checking for the court reporter.
Check test 1 2 3. 1 2 3. Sound check. Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3. Ready? Test. 1, 2.
Subcommittee will come to order, and let me welcome all of you to our subcommittee hearing today, the first of this new year in new Congress. Both Ms. Bass and I were delayed, and I apologize for that. We had a press conference on combating human trafficking. There are 12 bills on the floor between yesterday and today, so we were speaking on that. So again, I apologize to all of you for the lateness in convening the hearing. Nigeria, as you know, is Africa's most populous nation and is the continent's largest economy. Unfortunately, Nigeria is beset by various challenges that threaten the peace and stability of this African giant. The terrorist group Boko Haram continues its bloody reign of terror, now threatening to establish a caliphate on the model of ISIS. Religious and ethnic discord, which predates Boko Haram's emergence, continues unabated. Lower oil prices have seriously damaged an economy significantly dependent on oil revenues. Meanwhile, the prospect of a violent repeat of the 2011 post-election scene has ratcheted up tensions in Nigeria even further. Today's hearing will examine the situation in Nigeria and the United States' efforts to maintain positive relations with the largest U.S. trading partner in Africa and a major ally in international peacekeeping. U.S.-Nigeria relations were understandably rocky during the military rule of Sani Abacha in the 1990s. However, the advent of democracy with the 1999 elections ushered in an improved atmosphere of cooperation. Nigeria consistently ranks among the top recipients of U.S. bilateral foreign assistance and is the second largest beneficiary of U.S. investment in Africa. In recent months, though our relations have deteriorated, apparently some in the government of the president feel the U.S. is meddling in their internal affairs, especially when it comes to our noting of deprival of due process of rights of citizens by the Nigerian military and security forces. Our view is that friends don't let friends commit human rights abuses, and I think a good relationship can withstand that kind of give and take. Our subcommittee held a hearing last July 10th to examine the complaints that human rights vetting was a major obstacle to U.S. counterterrorism. What we found was that the State Department estimated that half of Nigerian forces would pass muster through the vetting process, which we found is slowed by too few staff working on these important issues. Still, the Nigerian government must be more cooperative itself. Some units in larger divisions may have human rights issues, but if replaced by units without such baggage, there would be created an entirely acceptable division for training. Late last year, the Nigerian government canceled the counterterrorism training of one of its battalions, which now places the entire training program on hold. We are making arrangements for discussions in the near future with Nigerian military officials and members of Congress and the Obama administration to try to overcome the stalemate and resume the cooperation that is absolutely necessary to meet the challenge posed by Boko Haram. As we all know, this terrorist group has wreaked havoc on the people of Nigeria, particularly in the northeast. It is estimated that more than 5,500 people were killed in Boko Haram attacks in last year alone, representing more than 60% of the more than 9,000 deaths caused by this group in the past 5 years. As many as 2,000 people may have perished in the Boko Haram attack on the town of Baga and nearby villages earlier this month. More than 1 million Nigerians have been displaced internally by the violence, and tens of thousands of others are now refugees in neighboring countries. Clearly, Boko Haram violence is escalating dramatically. Boko Haram has become part of the global jihadist movement and threatens not only Nigeria, but also Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. While the terrorist group may not be an official affiliate of Al-Qaeda or ISIS, they appear to be trying to create an Islamic caliphate in Nigeria. Various press reports estimate that the group has seized as much as 70% of Borno State, with additional territory under its control in neighboring Yobe and Adamawa states. In fact, Reuters calculated by mid-January of this year, Boko Haram was in control of more than 30,000 square kilometers, an area the size of the state of Maryland. For approximately 2 years, I pressed the administration to designate Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization. I argue that, like cancer, early intervention can mitigate its spread, severity, and duration. I traveled to Nigeria twice and convened 3 hearings during the last Congress on why an FDO designation might help, only to be told by then Assistant Secretary of State Johnny Carson that, quote, the phenomenon of Boko Haram is one of discrediting the central government in power for its failure to deliver services to people, close quote. On the very day of our hearing to consider a bill on FDO designation, the State Department, led by Secretary of State Curry, announced that Boko Haram was being designated a foreign terrorist organization. I would ask Mr. Jackson if you could, during the course of your testimony or answers, give us some insights as to what has happened with that designation. Has it helped? Was it too late? If you could touch on that, I know I and others would appreciate it. Meanwhile, Nigeria faces the prospects of post-election violence after presidential voting on February 14th. The race, as we all know, pits President Jonathan against former military Nigerian leader General Buhari in a rerun of the 2011 elections. This time, however, Buhari's All-Progressive Congress is a coalition of major opposition political parties, includes defectors from President Jonathan's People's Democratic Party, such as the Speaker of the National Assembly. Some PDP officials have referred to their opponents as Nigeria's Muslim Brotherhood, while APC officials accuse the Jonathan administration of representing only Christian Southerners. Party spokesmen on both sides have warned of potential violence, and remember, some 700 churches were torched in the immediate aftermath of the 2011 elections. And our hope is that, and especially with the Abuja Accord that was agreed to, that we will not see a repeat of that loss of life and of property. Let me just conclude that today's hearing is just the beginning of our renewed efforts to help Nigeria address the problems that threaten its stability. We must be honest with Nigerians and ourselves about the difficulties we both face. That is why we have asked our witnesses to give their honest assessment of where we are in the various situations that Nigeria is encountering, and to suggest actions our government can and should take to be most helpful. I'd like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Bass, for any opening comments she might have.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I want to thank our Chairman Royce over there, for both of you, for your leadership and for calling today's hearing to give us an opportunity to examine the critical issues of governance, security, and stability in Nigeria in the midst of Boko Haram and in the lead up to the national elections in just a few weeks. I'd also like to thank our distinguished witness for today, including Ambassador Robert Jackson from the State Department, as well as several Nigerian experts and civil society advocates. I look forward to hearing your perspectives, not only on the challenges facing Nigeria, but also on how the U.S., along with other regional partners, can provide support at this critical juncture, and how your agencies or organizations are promoting concrete solutions. The hearing title, Nigeria on the Brink, begs the question, on the brink of what? While the challenges facing Nigeria have been well publicized during the previous year and might lead some to expect the worst, it's my hope that today's hearing will be solution-oriented and not resigned to simply impending doom in Nigeria. In recent weeks, the terrorist group Boko Haram has escalated its violent attacks in a pattern that has become all too familiar over the past several years. The latest atrocity was the massacre of a reported 2,000 men, women, and children in the town of Baga in northeast Nigeria. A troubling tactic, a tragic tactic of Boko Haram, which has emerged of late, is the use of children in so-called suicide bombing attacks. And really, the children are being used as bombs because it is absolutely incorrect to consider children as suicide bombers. In addition, I remain deeply disturbed that the nearly 300 girls that Boko Haram kidnapped from their schools in mid-2014, as well as countless others who have not received the same media coverage, are still being kept from their families. By some estimates, more than 5,500 people were killed in 2014, with over 1 million Nigerians internally displaced by violence, and Nigerian refugee numbers in neighboring countries continuing to rise. This is why I'm concerned about the government-to-government relationship between the U.S. and Nigeria, particularly the ways in which mistrusts have hindered the kind of effective cooperation necessary to end the scourge of Boko Haram and to help set the stage for improved security, particularly in the lead up to the elections. During Secretary Kerry's visit to Nigeria this past weekend, he reiterated the U.S. condemnation of Boko Haram's attacks and stressed the need for credibility and transparency. The Secretary also praised some of Nigeria's Independent National Election Commission staff for taking concrete steps to achieve just that end. In meetings with both President Jonathan and his leading opponent, General Buhari, the Secretary committed U.S. support for both security and election assistance and received commitments from each candidate to administer issue-based campaigns free of violence. In the lead up to the February 14th elections, my hope is that those commitments will be met by all sides for the best outcome of Nigeria's citizens. Lastly, the Secretary praised regional nations such as Niger, who hosted a regional security ministerial last week, as well as noting President Obama's International Summit on Combating Violent Extremism planned to take place in Washington next month. While it's vital that these commitments to peace, security, and credible and transparent elections be made, it is now up to each of us to ensure effective coordination, improved diplomatic relations, and the transfer of the expertise and resources to realize these ends. I'm looking forward to working with my congressional colleagues, African regional bodies, and members of the Diplo Corps to ensure that our continued focus is on sustainable solutions for peace and security in Nigeria. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to chair to the full committee chairman, Ed Royce, gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and I thank you, and I thank Karen Bass as well for your trips to Nigeria. One of the realities here is this is a satellite image of the town of Baga before and after the attack, and reportedly as many as 2,000 people were slaughtered in this assault. Now, I remember conversations that I had some years ago in our trips to Nigeria. There was in northern Nigeria a governor who told us, a Muslim governor in the north, that because Gulf state money was coming in and establishing a new madrasa across the street from the madrasa where he grew up, he said, you know, it's 10 times the size, it has 100 times the budget, but apparently in all of these agreements, there's one thing that comes with it. A Gulf state imam who is changing our culture, changing our indigenous culture, and radicalizing our youth. And I said, what do you mean by radicalizing? He said, if you went into that madrasa, you would find a Bin Laden t-shirt on some of those young men. And he said, you know, I have a feeling that here in the north, it's only going to be a matter of time before they come for me. And then they'll come for my people. And then the slaughter will start. And I think today about the warnings this governor from an area near where Boko Haram operates gave us. I think of Deborah, who testified before our committee, one of the survivors from the village. Both of her parents were massacred. Now she's in hiding. She can't go back to Nigeria. And it took a real push. And yes, Chairman Smith is right. It took a push to convince the administration to put Boko Haram on this list, on this terrorist list. But frankly, Boko Haram is the ISIS of Africa. If you look at the political ideology, tell me the difference between what Boko Haram believes and what ISIS believes. And this is not an indigenous movement. To go back to the point the governor made, this is something introduced into society where children were radicalized. And now we're to the point where children are being used, you know, putting suicide vests on them and pushing them into a marketplace. This has to be confronted. And yes, it's going to be a tense political environment over there. Myself and Don Payne, who used to serve on this committee with us, and Colin Powell, we co-chaired an election observer team that went over to Nigeria for a prior election. I know how tough this election is going to be, given the fact that Boko Haram is operational in the north as they try to conduct this election. But I will tell you right now, we have absolutely no alternative but to engage with Nigeria, with the assets that we have, to go after Boko Haram. There is no other possibility here to end this violence. And the Nigerian military, despite its faults, It is the only feasible resource for defeating Boko Haram. We don't have another recourse except to use that resource that is their military. And we have a situation today where we've tied our hands. We've tied our hands so that we cannot use special ops and put on the ground, with the type of expertise and connection to satellite technology and tracking abilities that our special operations forces have, to go with the Nigerian military and track down, and we should have done it immediately when those 300 girls were captured. We should have tracked them. We should have assisted with our capabilities. No, our special ops forces don't have to be involved in an attack, but they can certainly, with all they know about how to free people from captivity, help plan an attack, help strategize, help key this thing up. My friends, it is long since time to lift the Leahy restrictions in the face of what confronts not just Nigeria anymore, but Chad and Cameroon and other neighboring countries. This is the region now that we see engulfed in this. And those of us who have the capacity, the capability of coming in and assisting, we should assist these countries in confronting this challenge. And that is why I very much appreciate the fact that the chairman of this subcommittee and Congresswoman Karen Bass, the ranking member, have been engaged in this issue, and I hope they will push for more U.S. engagement. Frankly, our military is unmatched in its technical and capacity building capabilities, and it's a travesty not to have them fully engaged in supporting the Nigerians to combat Boko Haram. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Royce. I'd like to now yield to Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Bass for holding today's hearing on this very critical issue. It is clear that Nigeria is in a very precarious situation as it faces its upcoming elections, increased threats of violence and instability from Boko Haram, and continued and serious human rights concerns. Because Nigeria is an important trading partner of the United States and an influential political power in Africa, its issues are of concern to the entire world. First, the continued terrorization and intimidation by Boko Haram is unacceptable and cannot be tolerated. The United States must continue to help fight the threat of Boko Haram and work to promote stability. But in our relationship with Nigeria, we must also enforce our expectations that the Nigerian government is honest, fair, and not corrupt. We will closely monitor and must closely monitor the upcoming elections in the hopes that they will accurately reflect the will of the Nigerian people. And finally, the United States must be more vigilant in protecting the human rights of all individuals around the world. Nigeria recently enacted a discriminatory law against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered individuals. And since then, we continue to receive reports of escalated violence, police and government oppression, and censorship. We cannot continue to ignore these developments either. I look forward to hearing from the witness regarding the U.S.-Nigerian bilateral relationship. And with it, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer?
Thank you. I'll learn how to use it. I look forward to hearing the testimony. I want to thank the subcommittee chair and the ranking member for having this hearing. I'm looking forward to being a member of this committee and doing some important work, and I echo the statements of the full committee chair on the problem that is Boko Haram. I look forward to your testimony today, sir, and hopefully seeing the United States get engaged in this important issue.
Will the gentleman yield for just a moment?
Yes.
With his opening statement. This subcommittee hearing complements the full committee closed briefing that we've scheduled tomorrow with the intelligence community, and I just wanted to share that with the members on Nigeria and Boko Haram. So thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Emmer, and welcome aboard.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to now introduce our first witness, the Honorable Robert P. Jackson. Ambassador Jackson is currently the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs. He previously served as ambassador to Cameroon, as well as Deputy Chief of Mission and Charge at the U.S. embassies in Morocco and Senegal. He has also served U.S. embassies in Burundi, Zimbabwe, Portugal, and Canada. At the State Department headquarters, he has worked in commercial and consular sections and conducted officer training. He also performed oversight work in the Office for the promotion of democracy and human rights after 9/11. Ambassador Jackson has appeared before this committee many times, and we welcome him, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this committee hearing. Ranking Member Bass, other members of the committee, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to discuss U.S. policy and relations with Nigeria, one of our most important African partners. With Africa's largest population, biggest economy, vibrant culture, vigorous democracy, and current service on both the UN Security Council and the UN Human Rights Council, Nigeria's success is important to us, to Africa, and to the world. This is especially true as Nigeria prepares to hold complicated and closely contested elections against the unwelcome backdrop of escalating bloodshed at the hands of the violent Boko Haram extremists in the Northeast, and the pressures on the country's currency and fiscal balance stemming from falling oil prices. Last year, I testified to your counterparts in the Senate, saying that, in part, a peaceful and stable Nigeria is crucially important to the future of Africa. And we cannot stay on the sidelines if it stumbles. Today, more than ever, the United States is committed to our strong relationship with Nigeria, and we are engaged with Nigeria and its neighbors in the fight against Boko Haram. As Secretary Kerry said in Lagos 2 days ago, the United States stands ready to work with Nigeria and its people, helping Nigeria combat insecurity in the Northeast and addressing its root causes, including expanding economic opportunity for all Nigerians and dealing with the other enduring challenges that will remain on our agenda. Before delving further into those challenges, I would first like to discuss the general elections, now just 18 days away. Because even in the face of horrifying attacks, terrorist organizations like Boko Haram must not distract Nigeria from carrying out credible and peaceful elections that reflect the will of the Nigerian people. The United States has focused significant diplomatic and programmatic effort on civic and political engagement, preventing electoral violence, and improving electoral administration. Our goal is to minimize violence, increase transparency, and boost credibility, so that whoever wins has the legitimacy to lead Nigeria to address its serious challenges. Presidential and National Assembly elections February 14th will be followed by gubernatorial and state assembly elections on February 28th. Many of these elections will be closely contested because a consolidated opposition party, the All Progressives Congress, has chosen former military head of state Major General Muhammadu Buhari to run against incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan, who heads the People's Democratic Party. Nigeria's elections are among the earliest of many across the continent in 2015 and can serve as an example to other countries. Organizing elections for over 69 million voters at more than 120,000 polling stations is no easy task. The Secretary's trip to Nigeria just weeks ahead of the election to meet with the candidates was intended to send a strong signal that we appreciate the enormity of the challenge and are invested in its peaceful outcome. We are working closely with Nigeria's Independent Election Commission, INEC, on processes to ensure as many eligible voters as possible are free to exercise their civic duty safely. We're doing everything we can to support the efforts of INEC and its respected chairman, Atahiru Jega, as they distribute voter registration cards and electronic card readers, develop a communications plan, and prepare plans for dispute resolution and violence mitigation. To increase the transparency of the electoral process and our ability to assess its credibility, the United States government is funding and fielding complementary election observation missions across the country. U.S. aid has had a program to strengthen Nigeria's capacity to observe its own elections. Over 3,000 locally recruited U.S. government-funded election observers in all 774 local government areas in the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory are already working hard, gathering data and monitoring for early warning signs of electoral violence. We are also funding a 36-member international electoral observer mission conducted in tandem by the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute. On top of this, Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Linda Thomas Greenfield will lead our diplomatic election observation on February 14th, and election observation missions based within the U.S. mission in Nigeria will field observation teams throughout the country during these general elections. Moreover, a U.S. government security expert will soon make a third trip to Nigeria, joining 2 long-term U.S. security and strategic communications advisors who are supporting INEC. Following the 2011 elections, 800 people died during 3 days of protests. Ambassador James Entwistle and his team have led an aggressive campaign to persuade Nigerian candidates, political party leaders, and opinion makers to pledge publicly to condemn violence. During his visit, Secretary Kerry reiterated to both President Jonathan and General Buhari that the world is watching Nigeria's elections and prevailed upon them to encourage their followers to commit to nonviolence. He welcomed the signing by both of the January 14th Abuja Accord, as it's called, on nonviolence and their agreement to accept the results of the election. Allow me to turn to Boko Haram. A peaceful and smooth transition is equally essential so that whoever is elected can quickly turn his focus to confronting and defeating Boko Haram. The threat is unfortunately not new, but attacks have increased in intensity and impact, as well as expanding to threaten Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. Recent estimates are that some 1 million Nigerians have been displaced internally, and more than 200,000 have sought refuge in neighboring countries. We are appalled by the accelerated pace and brutality of Boko Haram's attacks. This unchecked killing must stop. We agree that Boko Haram has killed more than 5,000 people in 2014, doubling in 1 year all of its killings since 2009. The trend of attacks has continued unabated this month. The satellite images from the destruction in Baga in early January demonstrate the rampage and have indeed gone viral. An unwitting 10-year-old girl was blown in half when the device around her waist detonated at the edge of a market in Maiduguri on January 10th, killing 19 other people. The next day, 2 other young female suicide bombers struck Paduskum, killing at least 6 others. Just last week, on January 20th, Boko Haram's leader, Abubakar Shekau, claimed responsibility for the attack on Baga and warned this was just the beginning of the killings, end quote, and threatened to wage war on neighboring Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. We are often asked why Nigeria has been unable to curb Boko Haram's advances. The answer is a complex mix of reasons. Public critics and Nigerian military sources have cited pervasive corruption that prevents the Nigerian armed forces from properly equipping frontline soldiers. Government officials have responded to criticism by highlighting the tremendously difficult task of fighting a well-armed insurgency that hides within local communities and noting that their forces have not been trained in counterterrorism. Last week, one of Nigeria's top security officials called Nigerian forces cowardly. Most recently, Nigeria's failure to send a senior official to Niamey, Niger for a January 20th ministerial on Boko Haram hindered the ability of all of the affected countries to craft an effective regional approach to the problem. The United States, however, was in Niamey, and we will continue to support Nigeria and its neighbors as they address the violence caused by Boko Haram. At the same time, Nigeria must commit to a comprehensive, holistic strategy for countering Boko Haram that protects civilians, respects human rights, and addresses the underlying causes of the conflict by bringing both civilian and security tools to the fight. We are supporting Nigeria and its neighbors to counter Boko Haram. U.S. assistance includes information sharing and technical assistance. We have provided commercial satellite imagery and are flying intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft over Nigeria and immediately sharing the results of those missions with Nigerian authorities on an almost daily basis. We have also helped establish a program to provide care, counseling, and education to the victims of Boko Haram and are providing humanitarian assistance to conflict-affected and internally displaced populations in the Northeast, as well as to Nigerian refugees who fled to neighboring countries, including Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. Boko Haram is not just a Nigerian problem. It's a regional problem. Most recently, Boko Haram kidnapped 80 people on January 18th, 30 adults and 50 young girls and boys, in a cross-border attack in Cameroon. Although the Cameroonian forces were subsequently able to repel the attackers and free 24 of the hostages, Boko Haram's largely unchecked success in seizing territory and expanding the reach of its attacks underscores the need for a robust, coordinated regional approach, a fully realized multinational task force to fight Boko Haram. Last week, Chad sent more than 2,000 soldiers, 400 trucks, and attack helicopters to reinforce Cameroon. At last week's ministerial meeting in Niger, Assistant Secretary Thomas Greenfield called on Nigeria and its neighbors to make the multinational task force into a force that can better fight Boko Haram. At the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa this week, we will continue to encourage other partners to redouble their efforts and press for meaningful African Union political support for the task force and the Lake Chad Basin's Commission to cooperate to defeat Boko Haram. As Assistant Secretary Thomas Greenfield told this committee in November of 2013, Boko Haram's activities call our attention not just to violence, but also to poverty and inequality in Nigeria. Achieving and sustaining peace in the northeast of Nigeria will require the Nigerian government to address legitimate concerns about government corruption, unfairness, accountability, and impunity that alienate the population and provide grievances used to radicalize disaffected youth. Finally, let me say just a word about the economy. Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa, and it is diversified. 83% of that economy is in non-extractive industries. Agriculture, services, and manufacturing are driving economic growth, which was 6.1% in the third quarter of last year and is expected to be 4.8% in 2015. Although the country is a global petroleum powerhouse, corruption is pervasive, and 60% of Nigeria's population lives in poverty. The impact of a more than 50% drop in oil prices since last summer has posed major fiscal and monetary challenges and is contributing to the slowdown in economic growth. The central bank has thus devalued the naira and raised interest rates. Over 70% of government revenue comes from petroleum exports, so the government has been forced to revise its budget, cut government spending, and look for ways to increase revenues. The administration that is elected next month may well face greater challenges with fewer resources to govern. Improving governance, implementing economic reforms, and committing to transparency would help secure Nigeria's long-term stability and the welfare of its people. In closing, Nigeria's success is important to us and critical to Africa. As Secretary Kerry declared in Lagos last Sunday, our hope is that Nigeria will set a remarkable example for the world in this election. On the foreign terrorism organization designations, Mr. Chairman, we're not aware of any assets that have been blocked, but we do feel that these designations have been potentially useful in preventing Boko Haram from accessing U.S. financial institutions. And I do want to emphasize, as far as the search for the girls is concerned, we continue to provide intelligence. We still have a multidisciplinary team in Abuja advising the Nigerians, meeting with them, and the FBI continues to assist with investigations, and we're assisting with countering IEDs. As we close, we appreciate the committee's interest in these issues. I hope that you and the other members will remain engaged, and I invite you to lend your voices by making statements and talking to social media in calling for peaceful, credible credible elections next month. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. And I'll collapse all of my questions into one question, if you wouldn't mind, just because of time. We have votes coming up very shortly. We think 3:15 to 3:30. Let me ask you, if I could, on the Chibok girls, do we have information about them? I've met Chibok girls, one in Abuja when I was on a trip there, and met several who escaped, the lucky ones. Are we any closer to reclaiming their freedom? Secondly, if I could, on the FDO progress, if you could tell us how many people are actually working it. Is it really getting a high priority? We know that the weapons cache of Boko Haram is growing, maybe even exponentially. Some of it they steal, some of it they buy from robbing banks, but some of it may be coming from places in the Middle East, if you could touch on that. We're all very pleased and happy and that Secretary Curry did meet with President Jonathan. I read the Secretary's, both the President and the Secretary's statements, and there was talk about the multinational task force, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and about more and more cooperation. Let me ask you this. Is it time for a U.S.-Nigeria task force? I was struck that when I was at the Fusion Center, that intelligence that we might provide that was actionable may not have been followed up on. You need a quick deployment of troops if you find something that needs action. And it seems to me that and on the Leahy Amendment, why not have a joint working group to focus on vetting Nigerian security forces? Some of the pushback has been a well-earned pride in the Nigerian military. They are tremendous peacekeepers. I saw them when I was in Sarajevo. I saw them again in Darfur. They have been gone all over and have done yeoman's work on peacekeeping. But again, it's a very special skill set required to combat a terrorist insurgency like this with Boko Haram. Why not have a joint working group and the vetting as well, so they have buy-in? Is that something you're thinking about? And again, on IDPs, more money, I think, needs to be provided. Yes, Nigeria is a rich country, but it does have a problem, as we all know, with the drop in oil prices. And finally, Abubakar Shekau has said, nobody can stop us and live in peace except if you accept Islam and live by Sharia law. He has said, we will kill anyone who stands against the will of Allah by opposing Sharia, and that they are fighting a religious war against Christians. These are all quotes. And that by Allah, whoever practices democracy, we will kill. Will the administration really brand them for what they are, a radical Islamist movement? I met so many Muslims who have lost loved ones in Nigeria, many more Christians, because they are targeting Christians. They are a horrific brand of Islam, a radical brand. I think we need to call it for what it is. And again, I know Buhari has signed, as well as President Jonathan, the Abuja Accord. But let's not forget, after 2011, 700 churches, 3,100 Christian-operated businesses and schools were burned. Over 3,400 Christian homes were destroyed. How enforceable, how real do you think he and his followers are in living up to that accord, so that there's not post-election violence? And that is critical, I think. Anybody can sign a piece of paper in the run-up to election. Do you have confidence that he will adhere to it? I yield.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for those questions. On the foreign terrorist organization designation, I'm going to have to get back to you on the numbers of people at the Treasury Department and the Justice Department who are working on this, because I don't have those figures immediately available. As far as a joint task force, I think you visited the center of a joint task force, and I want to note that France is working with Nigeria's neighbors to establish a coordination cell in N'Djamena that we believe will be very useful in this fight, and it's already showing promise in coordinating the activities of Cameroon and Chad as they work together in this activity.
But I mean across all sectors.
I
The
understand.
entire military complex, not just intelligence.
Right. But our Justice Department is represented in Lagos as part of the interdisciplinary team. The FBI is there. We have people who can advise on hostage negotiations and humanitarian assistance. I believe that the team is robust and has the disciplines necessary to address these issues. As far as Leahy issues are concerned, I note that the 7th Division, which has had primary responsibility for combating Boko Haram, has a new commander. So we will be looking at how we can work with Nigerian units. As you know, we vetted over 100 units and individuals last year who were found capable of working with us and qualified to receive U.S. assistance. And
Could I just say, Mr. Jackson, they need thousands, and they are very capable troops. They can be human rights vetted. The State Department has said 50% or more tomorrow could be vetted and found to be free of human rights abuses. They need that training, and they need it now. We're fighting the ISIS of Africa, so I just bring that urgency back, if you would.
I will take that back, Mr. Chairman. And you asked about branding Boko Haram. I would note that Daesh and Al-Qaeda in the lands of the Islamic Maghreb have disassociated themselves from Boko Haram because they consider it such an extreme organization.
Ms. Bass?
I will yield my time to Representative Wilson to make her statement.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Bass, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to discuss this very important issue. Last April, I was horrified when hundreds of girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram because they attended school. These precious girls reminded me of my own daughters and granddaughter, and I couldn't sit idly by. To this day, Boko Haram continues their reign of terror. There have been more kidnappings. They're using young children as human bombs. They continue murdering and terrorizing, and they attack villages and cities throughout Nigeria and bordering countries. Last June, I was part of a bipartisan CODEL that traveled to Nigeria, where I met with the victims of Boko Haram attacks and with the families of the kidnapped girls. I saw firsthand the immeasurable anguish that Boko Haram's heinous attacks have caused. I met with some of the Chibok girls who were fortunate to escape from Boko Haram. These girls thought they were going to be killed, and their parents thought they may never see their daughters again. I met with the organizers of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, who made it their mission to call attention to the atrocities committed by Boko Haram, to call for the return of the kidnapped girls, and to hold Nigerian leaders accountable. They did this despite being intimidated, beaten, and imprisoned for their efforts. They asked us to carry on and spread their work in the U.S. by tweeting Bring Back Our Girls, which I have been doing every day since leaving Nigeria. Nigeria has the resources to stop Boko Haram, I believe, but there is a lack of political will to do so, or do what is necessary to rescue the schoolgirls. I will be watching Nigeria's presidential elections next month. I pray these elections are fair and free from any violence or coercion. Regardless of which candidate wins, we must continue to put pressure on that winner to focus on Boko Haram and to finally eradicate this terrorist group. Last Congress, we passed 2 resolutions that I sponsored condemning Boko Haram. I thank the committee for their commitment to work with me to accomplish the goal of eradicating Boko Haram. Today, you will hear from Mr. Emmanuel Ogibi. His organization, Jubilee Campaign USA, does amazing work on behalf of the Chibok girls who escaped from Boko Haram, paying for them to come to the United States to continue their education in a safe environment. I look forward to hearing from him as well as our other witnesses. Thank you. We must do everything we can to bring back our girls and stop Boko Haram.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
Mr. Emmer.
Mine is very short. What is being done about the corruption and what can be done? It seems that you're talking about pervasive corruption throughout the government, and it's impacting the military's ability to stifle the activities of Boko Haram. I'm just interested to know what is being done and what can be done.
Thank you, Congressman. For a number of years, we've been working with Nigeria's anti-corruption agencies, and we've seen some successful investigations as a result of that. A tool that Secretary talked about during his most recent visit to Nigeria that we believe will be very useful is designating people as ineligible for U.S. visas. There's been a lot of attention paid to this in the Nigerian press over the last 2 days, and that indicates to me that this is something we need to explore in greater depth.
I would like to have more at the appropriate time. But if you could go back at the beginning of your testimony, in fact, I think in your written testimony, if it's at the end of page 1, beginning of page 2, where you talk about the upcoming election that's only 18 days away, and specifically, I think your words were making sure that it's credible and transparent, etc. It's the violence that I think many of us are most concerned with. You can have election experts, you can have U.S. aid to have the local folks actively engaged, but when the killing starts, how do you allow a true democratic process to go forward, and are steps being taken on the ground to address that potential violence?
The primary reason for having the Secretary visit Nigeria so close to this election was to emphasize that we are concerned about the conduct of the election and cannot accept violence. And we have been hammering home that message. We've sent these security experts to work with the Election Commission to identify the areas that we think are most prone to violence. But I want to underscore that in previous Nigerian elections, it hasn't been the elections themselves that have been violent in recent years. It's been after the results were announced. And this is something that we need to remain focused on. This is why we've solicited pledges from the candidates, why we value the Abuja Accord, which was signed in the presence of former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. And we will absolutely sanction leaders who exhort their followers to engage in violence.
One more, Mr. Chair. Just on that note, this is different. I understand that the 800 in the last election were during the protests that followed, but Boko Haram has an incentive to disrupt the election as it occurs. And I guess I'm interested if you can give me some specific examples, Mr. Jackson, of things that are being done in anticipation of that to hopefully prevent the violence on the day of the election.
Congressman, what I can say is that we have worked with the Nigerian Election Commission, the security forces, to ensure that the polling proceeds as smoothly and as safely as possible. Clearly, in the 3 states under the state of emergency, the voting places will have additional security. Whether that will be sufficient is subject to what Boko Haram does over the period of the election. And we're watching this very carefully. We will use our intelligence assets to try and predict where violence might break out, but it's not an exact science.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bass.
I'll yield to Mr. Cislini.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Thank you, Ambassador Jackson. Could you speak a little bit about what efforts are being undertaken to work with state and local officials in light of the kind of tense relationship with the national government to both work on security issues as well as counter-violence strategies? And also, would you speak a little bit about whether there are local organizations or individuals that we are working with to help counter some of the kind of violent ideology and the radicalization? And then finally, if you would speak to the issue of human rights, following the passage of anti-LGBT laws in Uganda, the United States engaged in a review that resulted in implementation of several penalties relating to gross human rights violations. And I know that the review of Nigeria, if it occurred, would be different, but why aren't we, in fact, taking the same steps in Nigeria to at least open a review and see what changes could be enacted to send a message to the government there? And what steps has our embassy in particular taken to help push back against some of the very serious homophobia and transphobia and to protect LGBT people in Nigeria from serious acts of violence?
Thank you, Congressman. First of all, on the violence, we've been working not only with the Election Commission, but with civil society. We've had civil society training programs as part of our $51 million elections effort over a 4-year period. That, I think, has been useful. We've also had a program financed through our Stability Operations Office, and we've worked with imams and other religious leaders in order to encourage them to speak out against the violence. We have particularly tried to identify religious leaders, both Christian and Muslim and animist, in the North who we believe have great influence with the people. And in the South, we've worked with some of the most prominent religious leaders, especially the bishops, to get out anti-violence messages to their congregations, and that's ongoing. We also undertook a rather unique anti-violence activity in the Delta, which was previously a hotbed for violence, and that was to create a film called In the Creeks. This film is an ongoing television series as a result of its success, and it advertises how Nigerian youth can find opportunities for employment and a new life outside of oil bunkering. It's been very successful, and we believe it's a model for this kind of activity and something that State Department is very proud of. Finally, on the LGBT issue, which is a very serious one, we note that Nigerian authorities have generally not enforced the law since its passage. Initially there was some really serious anti-LGBT activity, but that waned very quickly. We are aware that the law is being challenged in the courts, as it was in Uganda, and we believe that pursuing the constitutionality of the law or the lack thereof is a way to address this issue. We meet with LGBT groups on a regular basis. When I was in Nigeria in October, I met with LGBT activists to get their sense, and I'd be happy to talk with you privately about some of the other things that we're doing that I would prefer not to discuss in this setting.
Mr. Clausen?
Two questions, and thank you for coming today. Will you go back a little bit to what you said about youth employment and give me a larger picture of this issue of poverty being utilized to radicalize youth and what the Nigerian government is doing on a larger scale, educationally and in the private sector, so that folks have something to look forward to and hope, as opposed to being radicalized. And I guess the second question I have, since this is a question of radical Islam, what are the other religious leaders doing in the country to promote peace, to promote tolerance, and especially peace coming up to these elections? And what would you recommend that they do in this respect? Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. So with a poverty rate, an extreme poverty rate of 60% of the population, we believe that many Nigerians are disaffected and prone to radicalization. And the rampant corruption, impunity by the impunity of the security forces, and accountability for actions of all government officials, be they security officials or other government officials, pose real challenges and contribute, we think, to Boko Haram's being able to manipulate a small number of Nigerians to follow it. As for what religious leaders are doing, whether Christian, Muslim, or animist, in general, they've played a very important role in preaching messages of nonviolence for the elections and for Nigeria's activities in general. And many of them have spoken out very forcefully against Boko Haram, and I expect they will continue to do so.
Thank you. Ms. Bass?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to acknowledge that last week I had a long telephone conversation with Finance Minister Okonjo Iweala, and we talked about what was going on in Nigeria, and there was a lot of concerns expressed that she felt like things were being characterized in too much of an extreme fashion here, especially given the sensitivity of having an election coming up in a couple of weeks, to characterize a hearing as Nigeria on the brink. She just felt sent a bad signal. She raised an issue that the United States is blocking Nigeria from purchasing arms because of human rights violations. And so I wanted to ask you about a couple of questions. What specific criteria would the U.S. government need to see from the Nigerian government to determine that they are sufficiently working to remedy the human rights violations? And then also, what you feel is the sentiment of northern Nigerian communities toward the Nigerian army, and is the distrust between them harming their efforts to root out Boko Haram? That's one question. I have a few others. I do.
All right. Thank you. So when we talk about Nigeria on the brink, I think another way to look at that is Nigeria on the cusp, and much depends on what it does with the elections. The conduct of the elections and the government that emerges from those elections has real opportunities as well as challenges, and as the Secretary said, we hope they will seize those opportunities and address the challenges. The arms question is a very good one. While the decision to not approve the sale of American manufactured Cobra helicopters that the Israeli government wished to sell to Nigeria was driven by a belief that the Nigerians did not have the capacity to operate them. We have a policy and are in fact providing lethal equipment. And we will look at each request on a case-by-case basis. But Congresswoman Bass, I really want to underscore, we believe Nigeria has both the financial means and the technical means to procure any weapons that it believes it needs for its self-defense. And our decision to influence certain sales is guided as much by what we believe the capacity to use those weapons is as much as anything else. I want to emphasize that
you don't think they know how to fly them?
They do not currently have the capacity to fly Cobra helicopters. It would take at least 6 months for them to do the necessary training, and it would require that about 80 people be trained to maintain them. However, the Chadians are successfully employing their Cobra helicopters, which are armed, against Boko Haram, and it shows that it can be done, and the Nigerians could potentially do it with the right training and weapons. The problems that the armed forces of Nigeria face are in terms of morale, in terms of supply chains. We often hear from soldiers who have entered Cameroon fleeing Boko Haram that they haven't eaten for days, that they are not well equipped. And these are challenges for governance and leadership, and we would like to see the military address these challenges, deal with the internal corruption, and we believe that will have as much impact on the fight against Boko Haram as any weapon system possibly could.
Will you comment about the North?
I will. So we've all seen pictures of alleged Nigerian security force abuses. This is why we believe the Leahy vetting process is so important for dealing with the Nigerian security forces. But we have approved As I said, more than 100 individuals and units. And when we talk about that, we were training an entire battalion. We're talking about thousands of people, not just hundreds of people. When you look at the units, we're talking about having vetted thousands of people, thousands of individuals. So there are plenty of people who are eligible for U.S. security assistance, and yet it was Nigeria who chose to prematurely end the training of the 143rd in October before we felt they were fully capable, but they have been deployed, and that was a Nigerian sovereign decision.
So I was asking you a question about relationships between those folks that live in the north and the military. I don't know if you want to.
So we believe that some people have had excellent relations with the military. Other people feel abandoned by the military. And I think both of those extremes are very real in the 3 states under state of emergency.
So this is an entirely different subject, but you know, if the general topic here is Nigeria on the brink, I wanted to ask you if you were aware of reports of plans to privatize water in Lagos and across the country, and given how important fulfilling basic human rights can be in reducing the potential for violence, how would the negative effects of water privatization? Are you aware of this? Is the U.S. and is there any relationship we have? Is there any concern about this?
Honestly, Congresswoman, I'm going to have to get back to you on the water privatization. We have been following the electricity law and the new efforts to make electricity more available in Nigeria, and Nigeria is a power Africa country,
Right.
but I have personally not followed the water issue.
Okay, thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you for giving me this time. Ms. Jackson, thank you for your service and dedication. Since declaring Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization, have there been any evidence or progress in this investigation of uncovering those who are providing aid and abetting this terrorist group?
To date, Congressman, we have not found any U.S. individuals or financial institutions that are aiding Boko Haram or allowing Boko Haram finances to flow through our financial system.
Thank you. Has the administration found any connection between the use of the girls and unwittingly, suicide efforts that have been kidnapped by Boko Haram? And do you believe that any Shabbat girls may be used in this manner?
There's been a lot of speculation about this, but I don't think we have confirmed that any of the children who participated in the suicide bombings, certainly involuntarily, were from Chibok. I would note that there are 4 Chibok girls who are now resident in the United States, and we have certainly talked with them about their experience, and we make an effort to debrief people who have been in Boko Haram activity. Cameron has done a great job of doing debriefings of hostages, and we encourage the Nigerians to follow suit.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. If I could, just for clarification, Mr. Jackson, as you know, there are fundamental differences in the United States over the whole LBGT issue. I am a strong believer in traditional marriage and do not construe homosexual rights as human rights. Others have a different view, and I certainly respect them. But I want to know, has the administration, and I would ask for a clarification on this, has the administration's view on LBGT affected in any way or in any way hindered U.S. support to Nigeria to combat Boko Haram? And secondly, when it comes to humanitarian and money for IDPs and money that would for health issues, has there been any? Has the administration held back or in any way affected funding to the faith community, whether it be Muslim or Christian, in the dissemination of those funds to combat malaria or any of the other problems faced by Nigerians?
Mr. Chairman, to my knowledge, there has been no impact of the same-sex marriage prohibition bill on any of our activities, be it financial assistance, humanitarian assistance, or what organizations we work with in Nigeria.
I appreciate that. Could you also, I know that's your reasoned opinion, but get back to us if there is anything that would contradict
I would
that.
be happy to inquire, but I feel quite clear, since I see all of our assistance numbers, but I would have to check on whether we've decided not to work with any specific organizations. That I will get back to you.
Good. And finally, again, on the U.S.-Nigeria Task Force idea, if you could follow up and get back to us on that as well. This would be a multidimensional approach to get complete and full buy-in from the Nigerians. You know, I think for whatever reason, there was a cessation of the training of their military. That needs to be resumed. We got to find out what it was that encumbered that and get back so that hopefully thousands of Leahy-vetted Nigerian soldiers and officer corps can get the training they need to vanquish Boko Haram.
Mr. Chairman, I will get back to you. As the Secretary noted, we believe that having peaceful and credible elections is a condition for greater engagement, and we want to get through that step first.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson. I'd like to now, because we are under a little bit of a time crunch, welcome our second panel, and I thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your testimony. Beginning with Dr. Peter Pham, who is the director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. He is the incumbent vice president of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, an academic organization which represents more than 1,000 scholars, and is editor-in-chief of the organization's Journal of the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Pham was the winner of the 2008 Nelson Mandela International Prize for African Security and Development. He has authored half a dozen book chapters concerning Somali piracy, terrorism, and stabilizing fragile states, as well as more than 80 articles in various journals. He has testified before our subcommittee on several occasions on a number of topics, and we welcome him back. We'll then hear from Mr. Badegojo, who is the principal partner of a law firm in Nigeria established in 1987, in which he has acted as legal consultant and company secretary to many blue-chip companies and Orthodox religious bodies in Nigeria. Between 1981 and 87, he worked with the firm Burke & Company in Lagos, where he was the head of chambers between 85 and 87. He was awarded the rank of Senior Advocate of Nigeria by the Legal Practitioners Privileges Committee in 2010. This title is conferred only to a very select group of very senior attorneys in Nigeria. We'll then hear from Mr. Emmanuel Ogebe, who's the manager of the Peaceful Poles 2015 project and an experienced attorney specializing in international matters focusing on Nigeria. Exiled to the United States after becoming a political detainee during the brutal years of Nigeria's military dictatorship, Mr. Ogebe has played a role in shaping U.S. policy towards Nigeria in its quest for democracy. He has experience in managing, designing, and implementing complex international programs and projects in Nigeria. Then we'll hear finally from Mr. Chris Fomunyo, who is Senior Associate and Regional Director for Central and West Africa at the National Democratic Institute. He has organized and advised international election observation missions and designed and supervised country-specific democracy programs and civic organizations, political parties, and legislative bodies throughout Central and West Africa. He recently designed and helped launch the African Statesman Initiative, a program aimed at facilitating political transitions in Africa by encouraging former democratic heads of state. He is also the adjunct faculty at the African Center for Strategic Studies and former adjunct professor of African politics at Georgetown. Dr. Pham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bass, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you not only for the opportunity to come before you today to discuss the present situation in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but also for the sustained attention with which the subcommittee has consistently dedicated to the West Africa as a whole and to Nigeria in particular, as well as for its solicitude for the challenges faced in that region by the United States and our African and other partners. I think I speak for many in the policy and advocacy communities in expressing our gratitude for the leadership which the chairman, the ranking member, and members of the subcommittee and its staff have shown, including no fewer than 3 hearings in the 113th Congress, including the one last June on the ongoing struggle against Boko Haram, which you accorded me the privilege of testifying at. It should be acknowledged that this subcommittee was already working on the present hearing well before the news cycle turned to Nigeria once again in the aftermath of the Boko Haram attacks on Baga 2 weeks ago. With your permission, I'll present a summary of my current assessment of Boko Haram and the situation in Nigeria, and ask that my prepared statement be entered into the record of this hearing.
Without objection, your statement and that of all of our distinguished witnesses will be made a part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At any time, elections in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, the continent's largest economy, home to both its largest Muslim community as well as its largest Christian community, will be a pivotal moment fraught with geopolitical, economic, strategic implications. However, this is all the more the case as Nigerians prepare to go to the polls in less than 3 weeks in what many analysts view as perhaps the most competitive presidential race since the transition from military to civilian rule in 1999. While I know that some have questioned the title of this hearing and its reference to a country on the brink, it is not an exaggeration to say that what has come together is a perfect storm of security threats, including, of course, the continuing insurgent activity of Boko Haram in the extreme northeastern part of Nigeria, its terrorist attacks beyond the region to other parts of Nigeria as well as neighboring countries, the humanitarian challenges, not least of which are the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who have been displaced because of the conflict, and the economic pressures, top amongst which is the impact of declining oil prices on the national budget, and thus resources available to the federal government to deal with the aforementioned challenges. Permit me, therefore, to begin by reviewing these challenges as they currently stand before returning to the upcoming elections and what the United States might be able to do to help have a positive effect on the situation in Nigeria. Since the subcommittee's hearing on the fight against the militants last June, Boko Haram has unfortunately continued to be on a roll, and in fact appears to have even ramped up its momentum. Depending on which Nigerian official or international analyst one chooses to credit, this means the group effectively exercises at least loose dominion over a total area that is either larger than the state of Maryland, as you mentioned, or perhaps even slightly smaller than the state of West Virginia. Just this past weekend, an assault on the Borno state capital of Maiduguri by Boko Haram was repulsed, although I'm not entirely convinced that the strategic objective of that attack was so much to storm the city as to underscore a message, given that the attack came the day after the Nigerian president campaigned there amid heavy security and sought to reassure the citizens that the insurgency would be defeated. On the other hand, the group's simultaneous attack on Monguno, which received less attention, a town near Nigeria's borders with Chad and Cameroon, was very unfortunately successful, resulting in the capture of a city with its population of more than 110,000 people, as well as the large military base nearby. Nigerian military spokesman admitted that the garrison in Monguno, consisting of some 1,400 soldiers from the 243rd Army Battalion and other units, were overwhelmed. The seizure of Monguno, which sits at the intersection of 3 major roads, removes one of the key buffers protecting Maiduguri and the 2 million people who reside there or who have taken refuge there from complete encirclement by Boko Haram forces. Furthermore, Boko Haram has been using the territory it holds or clears out as a base to launch a campaign of terrorist attacks reaching other Nigerian states as well as neighboring countries, some of which, like Niger, are already under incredible pressure from militants linked both to al-Qaeda's North African affiliate as well as spillover from the continuing disintegration of Libya. Niger's President Mohamedou Issoufou has even been quoted as saying that the Islamic State is at our door. In its ongoing offensive, Boko Haram is not only using the terrorist tactics it's honed over the last 5 years, but even ratcheting up with new twists, like the recent use of young girls as young as 10 years old to carry bombs into crowded settings. Even more worrisome, as a number of analysts have pointed out, Boko Haram's recent messaging and activities point to a troubling convergence tactically and ideologically with the so-called Islamic State. While the reasons for failure to contain, much less roll back, Boko Haram's advance are addressed in my prior testimony are indeed legion, with plenty of blame to go around, I would be remiss if I didn't call attention to the fact that the address last week at Chatham House by Sambo Dasuki, National Security Advisor to Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, if it indeed is representative of current consensus in Abuja and consequent future conduct by the federal authorities, represents a significant and promising shift in strategic thinking. Not only has Boko Haram wreaked havoc in Nigeria's northeast quadrant and parts of Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, but the group's attacks have also precipitated a veritable humanitarian crisis spanning the region. The combined effects of the insurgent seizure of livestock and food supplies, as well as the closure of markets, the abandonment of farms, some for several years in a row, have resulted this month in the warning from the Famine Early Warning Systems Network of the U.S. Agency for International Development that without massive assistance, some 3 million people will not be able to meet their basic food needs by the middle of this year. In the context of discussing the humanitarian crisis caused by Boko Haram, it's incumbent upon me to draw attention to a frequently overlooked fact. While northern Nigeria has historically been predominantly Muslim, the north is not without its sizable Christian population, just as some parts of the south, especially the southwest of the country, have significant Muslim communities. Consequently, both Muslims and Christians have been victims of Boko Haram's brutal assaults. However, the Christian community has suffered a disproportionately high toll. According to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Maiduguri, in just 2 months, August and September of last year, 185 churches were destroyed by Boko Haram in Borno and Adamawa states. When added to the 300 churches destroyed in 2013 and those destroyed in previous years, it adds up to an unholy tally of more than 1,000 Christian houses of worship destroyed by Boko Haram since the last time Nigerians went to the polls. With hydrocarbons still making up much of Nigeria's exports and up to 80% of the government's revenues, the dramatic fall in global oil prices cannot but have a major impact on the Nigerian economy. The Naira is trading at record lows against the US dollar. As I was leaving the office to come here today, $1 US brought about 190 Naira. The stock market is down by almost 1/3. Expectations for economic growth in 2015 have been revised downward, and the federal budget has been recalibrated twice in recent months. And for that, I give credit to the finance minister for at least recalibrating the budget, which is more than what some other oil-producing countries have done. In addition, pressures exerted on the economy by the global commodity prices, there's been the negative impact of the ongoing insurgency on the economy of the northern part of the country in general, and the Northeast in particular. Diminished revenues clearly impact the resources available to Nigeria to fight the insurgency and fund the sort of holistic approach to development that can truly drain the fever swamps that feed extremism. All this sets the context for the upcoming general elections, which Secretary John Kerry rightly described on Sunday as one of the most important elections Nigeria has ever held. There are a number of challenges to the vote, however. In deference to my good friend, Dr. Christopher Munyo, who just returned from a joint International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute pre-election assessment, and will address the main technical and structural issues with the election organization, I'll limit myself to just a few points of concern. First, the specter of Boko Haram has increasingly impacted the election and will continue to do so, with numerous local government areas either under the insurgents' control or otherwise rendered unsafe. Even the Independent National Electoral Commission has acknowledged that it will be impossible to organize voting across the entire territory of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Whether satisfactory arrangements can be made for displaced persons remains to be seen. In addition, millions of voters across states most impacted by Boko Haram may still be deterred from voting by a fear of suicide bombing or other attacks mounted by the terrorists. Thus, the political question that will be answered only after the elections is how the winner claims the mandate of the people when so many could potentially be unable to express themselves. 2, even aside from Boko Haram in the Northeast, divisive and inflammatory messages which some political figures and their supporters have been delivering through traditional and social media in several parts of Nigeria is worrisome, raising as it does the risk of the sort of localized violence that has marred elections in the past. Of course, the impunity of those responsible for the violence surrounding the previous polls, including 2011, does little to discourage these people. Third, Election Day itself presents extraordinary security challenges commensurate with the temptations it undoubtedly presents to the terrorists who would ideologically reject democratic politics and who strategically have every reason to tarnish the poll. Fourth, in the lead up to next month's vote, various fault lines have emerged in greater relief, dividing Nigerian society along various ethnic, regional, and religious lines. Ironically, these are the sorts of fissures that the first past the post democratic politics exacerbates rather than mitigates. In addition to the crisis in the North, adds a wild card to the election, insofar as Nigeria's constitution requires the presidential candidate winning not only to win 50% plus one vote of the total votes cast, but also that he win 25% of the votes in 2/3 of the states of the Federation. Fifth, the intensely competitive presidential race and exceptional circumstances of security under which it's being run have given rise to concern that the winner and or his supporters may refuse to accept the outcome, even if the election itself is credible. It goes without saying, Mr. Chairman, that the bilateral relationship between the United States and the Federal Republic of Nigeria has gone through something of a rough patch recently, and at a time that could not be less opportune for any chasm to open up between the two countries. While the United States indeed has a role it can and should play in this pivotal moment in Nigeria's history, we also need to be realistic about what that role is, cognizant of some very real limitations. That said, Secretary Kerry's visit to Nigeria over the weekend, his meetings with the two leading contenders and other officials helped underscore the importance that we recognize in this election and our commitment to a strong working relationship with Nigeria going forward. While much of what we may be able to do and would like to do in cooperation with Nigeria to combat Boko Haram may have to wait until the dust settles after the election, there are things which can be done now, and those we need to look at. Mr. Chairman, it's hard to exaggerate the importance of Nigeria's upcoming general elections, not only for the immediate political future of Africa's giant, but also in light of the rapid expansion of the threats posed by Boko Haram and the inability, for various reasons, of the Nigerian forces so far to contain it, much less defeat the militants. The international community, Mr. Chairman, can only hope that the result that emerges from that election is indeed the will of the people, and we ask and we should stand by the Nigerian people as they queue up to cast the votes for their future, indeed all of ours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your insights. We are a little pressed because there may be some votes coming soon, so, but thank you so very much. Mr. Badejo.
Chairman Smith and ranking members of the committee, subcommittee, I thank you for this privilege to testify before you on this important issue, which threatens the continued existence of my country, Nigeria. I acknowledge with gratitude the tireless efforts of the chairman and members on Africa and Nigeria in particular. I know that your efforts will further cement the bond of friendship between the United States of America and Africa, and also assist my country, Nigeria, tremendously in overcoming the present challenges. I describe myself as an officious bystander. I have never held any political office in Nigeria. I am not a card-carrying member of any political party. So I have come here today to tell you what I have seen on ground in Nigeria, where I just arrived yesterday, as one who is keenly interested in the affairs of my country. I also must state that I belong to the Lift Up Now organization, and I'm associated with the faith-based community organization in New Jersey. And I know that they share the same views with me. Travels of democracy in Nigeria. We must remember that Nigeria consists of 250 ethnic groups. They have different cultures, and they also have differences in religion and worldview. What the British did was to, by fiat, forge these ethnic groups into one single country. The British organized elections before Nigeria became independent. These elections were more or less credible because of the presence of British government, who tried as much as possible to make politicians play by the rules. But since independence, immediately after independence, what we had in Nigeria, unfortunately, were parties whose support base were mainly rooted in their ethnic areas. So we had three parties, major parties, and other smaller parties, who were constantly at war with themselves and trying all sorts of methods to control the resources of the federal government at the center. And that was the beginning of insecurity in Nigeria. And this insecurity, which led to riots in the southwestern part of Nigeria, which is now called the Southwest region, led eventually to the collapse of the First Republic. There was military interregnum, and the Second Republic also faced similar challenges, in the sense that these parties remained in their enclaves, perpetually struggling for power in the center. And this complexity explained or is at the root of what we have as the Nigerian problem today. And it must be understood before we can proffer solutions to these challenges. In the Second Republic, we must remember also that that republic collapsed 3 months after the election, the second election in that republic, because of rigging, thuggery, inability to conduct a credible election, and the other security lapses that came with that election. So the military took over again. And then we had another spell of military interregnum. And then we tried a third republic. And that third republic also collapsed before it was actually born. Why? Because the difficulty in accepting the results of the election of the June 12, 1993, where the ruling oligarchy refused the result of that election. And that was the end of the short-lived Third Republic. Now, after the military interregnum again, we went into the Fourth Republic. And we can observe that in the Fourth Republic, Nigeria has survived 3 elections. One in 1999, in 2003, 2007, and 2011. And this is the 5th election in the process. And this is the longest time that we have had an unbroken democratic record in Nigeria. And what are the factors that is responsible for seeing us through up till today? The factors are: 1, the ruling political elite have realized that they needed to come out with parties that have a little bit of national spread. And they have realized also that the Nigerian nation cannot afford to have another military intervention. And so, at the beginning, at the time of every election since 1999, we have had rising tensions, just as we are having now. And these tensions have dissolved immediately after the election, with the ruling political elite taking some steps to douse the tension. Now, what happened in 1999, 2003, and 2007 is that we had situations where the geopolitical zone of the country that lost the federal election at the center will be dissatisfied, and there will be pockets of post-election violence, which Nigerian governments have met by either inviting the opposition to join in the cabinet or inviting selected individuals within the opposition to come into the cabinet to participate in government. This process doused tension considerably. But the build-up to the present election has witnessed something we have never seen before in Nigeria. And it's really, really alarming. Now, I will need to trace what led us, the history of what led us to this present position so that we can understand. The government that was put in place in 1999 was headed by President Olusegun Obasanjo, who is from the Southwest. He had a vice president from the northeastern part. They ran the government for 8 years, and he handed over to President Yar'Adua, who is from the northwest. And the vice president at that time is the current president, who is from the south-south geopolitical zone. And you will discover that it means without changing government, the Nigerian political elite succeeded in rotating power from 2 regions to another 2 regions. So you had a semblance of stability in the polity. Unfortunately, President Yar'Adua died, and we had a president from the south-south. And then that was the beginning of the escalation of these serious security challenges that we faced. Now, the contest for power is now contest for power between the northwest and the south-south. So we have the 2 contestants for power in Nigeria now, one from the northwest and another from the south-south. And there are a lot of people in Nigeria today who are supporting these candidates based on the region they come from. So you will find a lot of their supporters supporting them because they feel that they come from the region where they come from.
Mr. Badejo, we have 15 minutes to be physically on the floor for a series of votes. If we could go to Mr. Ogebe and then to our next distinguished witness, and then if there's another minute or so, you could sum up.
Yes, I just want to sum up. I will sum up now. I will sum up now. I'm permitted to sum up.
But if you gentlemen could equally divide it, about 7 minutes each. And then we'll come back to you for a 1-minute sum up.
Yes, I will sum up. Now, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me once more to speak. And I just want to commend this panel. This is the first time that I've addressed a panel where 75% of the membership had recently been to Nigeria. So I commend you for your courage in doing so at this trying time. I think it's also fitting that today is the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, that we're looking at an issue that deals with the Auschwitz of our time. I just returned from Nigeria recently where the Baga atrocity occurred. And to put this statistically, in 2012, Boko Haram killed approximately 2,000 people. In the first week of 2015, they have already exceeded the number of people they killed in 2012. Last year, it took them 6 months to achieve what they've done this year in a matter of 7 days. But I also want to draw attention to the fact that Boko Haram has taken a backseat to ISIS, even though the terrorism rankings indicate that Boko Haram has led ISIS in the last 3 years in atrocities. And it's a puzzle to me till this day that Boko Haram does not get the attention that ISIS has. But then even when we talk about Paris occurred at this very same time as Baga. And Baga got way more attention, Paris got way more attention than the people of Baga ever did, even though the destruction of Baga was an extinction level event. I want to say that Black lives do matter when it comes to global terrorism as well. let me also seize this opportunity to say there is a French connection to what is happening in Nigeria. France has a huge, I call it the France loophole. We have the FTO designation, but France is one of the countries that pays Boko Haram huge ransom money for kidnapped citizens, which is fueling the killings of black people in Nigeria. France needs to understand that global terrorism is not isolated to one part of the world. When you pay money to terrorists, they use it to kill other people. And I hope that this is a wake-up call to France. You can't give Boko Haram money to kill Nigerians. Boko Haram has killed people of over 15 countries. They've killed Italians, they've killed Greeks, they've killed Norwegians, many people. So indirectly, France's money is going to fueling that organization. Boko Haram does not have the oil wells that ISIS has, so it relies on this ransom money to be able to fund itself. Now, today I want to, of course, speak about the elections, because that, unfortunately, is another reason that religious minorities are killed in northern Nigeria. In a 3-year window, in 2011, in a 48-hour time period, 700 churches were destroyed, hundreds of Christians were killed. People were pulled out of taxis and killed because they were Christian, not because they asked them who they voted for. Because they were Christian, they assumed that they voted for a Christian. My cousin was shot 5 times in 2011. In 2012, we had the Boko Haram atrocities. In one day, they killed over 200 people. And so we see that elections compete with Boko Haram for the killing of indigenous Christian minorities in northern Nigeria. And that is why the elections on February 14th this year will likely be a Valentine's Day massacre for the poor Christians of northern Nigeria. And so I just, in the last 2 weeks, started a project called Peaceful Polls 2015, because based on the atrocities I saw in 2011, we said we need to do something to avert these avoidable atrocities and tragedies. And one of the things we did, I know Congressman Emma was asking what practical things are being done. My project, the Peaceful Polls Project, has filed FOIA requests with the government of Nigeria saying, where are the people that you prosecuted for all the atrocities last time? If they're not in jail, guess what? They're coming back again. And so in the next few weeks, we're following up with the various attorneys general's offices to ensure that impunity does not continue and that these people are put behind bars. I will quickly go to what I consider the recommendations that I would like to make. And let me say here, Congressman, that I think it is illogical for the U.S. Military trainers to say, well, the Nigerians don't have equipment, so we can't train them. But on the other hand, you're refusing to sell them equipment. And so we have a situation where the Prime Minister of Iraq is saying, you know, we want to buy weapons from the U.S. and we need loan deferments to buy the weapons. Nigeria is saying, we're going to pay cash for these weapons, and you're saying no. That is not how the marketplace works. Give Nigeria the weapons, give them the training, they have the human resource to make this happen. But Mr. Congressman, let me say, sir, that with regard to the Chibok girls, the world has blinked. The girls had 15 minutes of fame, and we walked away. It's now 9 months. I spoke to a man who escaped from one of Boko Haram's concentration camps last week, and he told me that as recently as September, the girls had not all been married off. That means that we can still rescue them. That means that they will not all possibly have babies at this point, which will make it easier for us to rescue them. But we have 40 days to rescue them, and we need to work with that time window. Finally, Mr. Congressman, let me say that you've done a great job in calling for a victim fund in Nigeria. And a month after you made that call, the president of Nigeria responded by launching a fund. I think that means that you should come to Nigeria more. But that said, I do want to say that there's something we can do right here, right now in America, which is to reintroduce the bill that Congresswoman Frederica Wilson introduced last month. the bill would allow forfeited Nigerian assets here to be put into a victim assistance fund. As she mentioned, I was responsible for bringing 10 of the Chibok girls and putting them back in school in America. We can do that more. We can do that, and we can do a lot more without using U.S. taxpayer funds. We can use funds from Nigeria that are here already. So, Mr. Congressman, Mr. Chairman, let me say, we may not be able to bring back our girls, but we can help those who escaped, and we can do that by bringing back that bill. So bring back our bill, HR 5778, which Honorable Congresswoman Frederica Wilson introduced last session, and I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ogebe. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Fomun Yu.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Karen Bass, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the National Democratic Institute, NDI, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss current political developments in Nigeria in light of next month's general elections. This is a summary of my written testimony, as my full testimony has been submitted for the record. Nigeria faces significant challenges that could undermine the success of the 2015 polls. 2 weeks ago, NDI and the International Republican Institute, IRI, conducted a pre-election assessment mission to Nigeria. I was part of that delegation and just returned from Nigeria. I asked that the delegation's statement be included in the record.
The objection's ordered.
2015 elections in the eye of the storm. The 2015 elections will take place in a difficult political and security environment for Nigeria. The country is deeply polarized along regional, religious, and partisan lines. These cleavages are exacerbated by citizen dissatisfaction over the economy, the Boko Haram insurgency, poor delivery of public services, and allegations of large-scale fraud. Moreover, Nigeria has a history of election-related violence. Boko Haram extremists pose a major threat to the conduct of peaceful polls. Insecurity in the northeastern states of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa, which have approximately 4.5 million registered voters, could cause the disenfranchisement of a large number of voters. In addition, hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons, IDPs, are not likely to return to their home constituencies before Election Day and may therefore not be able to vote. Nigeria pulling back from the brink. Despite these challenges and many more, Nigeria still has the ability to pull itself back from the brink, in part because of a number of measures undertaken by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. These include biometric registration, which entailed a thorough audit of the voter registry and using voters' biometric data to eliminate double entries, underage voters, and the deceased. Close to 5 million names were expunged. Machine-readable permanent voter cards, PVCs, and voter card readers, which will allow INEC to track number of accredited voters per polling site and therefore hinder the inflation of results noted during previous elections. An interagency consultative committee on election security charged with improving election security by facilitating seamless coordination among governmental agencies. INEC has also accredited 78 citizen observer coalitions and 19 international delegations to monitor the polls. Nigeria's vibrant civil society also has undertaken a number of initiatives to enhance the legitimacy of the polls. These include voter education and get out the vote campaigns targeting youth, including a campaign launched by the well-known Nigerian artist Two-Faced Idibia in collaboration with the Young Stars Foundation with technical assistance from NDI, and various interfaith initiatives led by Muslim and Christian leaders aimed at promoting violence-free polls. In addition, the Transition Monitoring Group, TMG, a coalition of more than 400 civil society organizations, is gathering and analyzing nationwide data on acts of violence and to identify early warning signs of violence. TMG will also use parallel vote tabulation methodology that will draw on statistical principles to provide real-time qualitative and quantitative assessments of voting day, and verification of the official election results. TMG has recruited and trained over 3,000 observers for the PVT quick count. Finally, on January 14th, presidential candidates, including the two frontrunners, signed a public pledge for a peaceful election, the Abuja Accord, committing themselves to run issue-based campaigns, to refrain from violence and inflammatory speech, and to speak out against any such violence. The way forward. Under normal circumstances, conducting national elections in Nigeria is no easy feat. And these are not normal times. The stakes are extremely high. At this crucial moment, Friends of Nigeria should send a strong message to its government and the Nigerian people, underscoring their support for violence-free and credible elections. They should also appeal to INEC to guarantee proper administration of the polls and to the government of Nigeria to provide security for voters. The Nigerian people are to be commended for their efforts to increase citizen participation and enhance prospects for peaceful elections, and must be encouraged to do more in the remaining weeks and the post-election period. The international community should continue to provide objective and non-partisan assessments of the electoral process with a forceful message that violence will have consequences for the legitimacy of the election outcome. All concerned parties should therefore put in place contingency plans to safeguard the peace and further consolidate the democratic gains that would emerge from a meaningful electoral process. To conclude, as a highly respected Nigerian religious leader told the NDI-RI delegation in Abuja 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "We Nigerians have perfected the act of dancing on the brink, but it is an uncomfortable place to be in," end of quote. In my humble opinion, Nigeria does not have to stay on the brink in perpetuity. Should the 2015 polls be peaceful and credible, Nigeria would have a lot going for it. The outcome of these elections would have significant implications for the consolidation of democracy in Nigeria and elsewhere on the African continent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, for this opportunity.
Dr. Fomano, thank you so very much for your testimony, all of you for your expert, incisive commentary. And if we could get back for 1 minute, we're almost out of time, if we could.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Now, the challenges confronting Nigeria can be solved both in the short term and the long run. In the short term, I believe the United States should engage Nigerian leaders in ensuring that they maintain peace and sensitize them towards moving on in an atmosphere of peace and security in the country, knowing fully well that the fundamental problems are caused by the ethnic configuration of Nigeria, insecurity caused by corruption, and chronic inefficiency. So the United States government should note this and then assist Nigeria in coming out of this problem. On the long term, I believe that whatever government comes into place must be constructively engaged. There must be, if the United States can, legislation that will assist Nigeria in establishing enduring democracy. One thing that the United States can do is to assist Nigeria in having a center for democratic studies established that will be funded, that will be well positioned in terms of staff to address the problems of Nigeria. There must be political education of Nigerians. I believe that Nigeria will survive, and all hands must be on deck to ensure that that nation gets its political kingdom. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity.
Thank you, all four of you, for your written testimonies, which will help this committee, will help hopefully the administration. As we go forward, your opinions are deeply valued and cherished, so I thank you. We don't have time for questions because of this series of votes, and I apologize. The hearing is adjourned.